To say here a little bit note about the nature of that blockade that Nasser had set up, um, how effective it was, what the purpose was, and such. So because one of the claims by this Israeli spokesman, right, for what how the war went, right, Abu Eban, was that the Straits, right, were they were effectively there was an attempt at strangling the Israeli economy, right? That it was an act of war, right, um, and that therefore Israel's preemptive attack. Remember, in the '67 war, Israel preemptively bombs Egyptian planes on the ground, right? Obliterates their air force essentially. And you're saying, well, that's a reaction. It's not an initiative. Okay, well, let's talk about that a little bit. Um, so, on the one hand, even before, say, the Suez Crisis, right, the Straits of Tiran were closed to ships heading for Israel's port city of Eilat. Nasser's avowed reason for imposing the blockade was Israel's refusal to honor the UN resolutions calling on it to allow the Palestinian refugees expelled from 1948 to return home. Right? Remember, that's a big issue in the 48. In 48 after the Nakba, right? Lots of Palestinians are expelled, and the UN resolutions fairly call for allowing these refugees to return, and Israel isn't allowing that, and so Nasser says, okay, I'm going to block the straits, right? Um, Now, there's a question of could, in what follows in the decade that follows, right, did Israel have the right to force it open? Well, I mean, at the very least, it's a complicated legal question. The official U.S. position held that, borrowing a, quote, contrary decision by the World Court, Israel had a right of free and innocent passage through the Straits. Nevertheless, the Secretary of State, Dulles, acknowledged that this was a highly complicated question of international law and that there was a certain amount of plausibility to the Egyptian view. This was also the opinion of U.S. legal scholars who advised World Court adjudication. For example, Charles Yost, the U.S. envoy sent to negotiate with Nasser, conceded that Egypt's case was at least arguable, and ultimately, he urged referring the issue to the International Court of Justice. Or William Fulbright, right, the guy who founded the scholarship that I received at one point, right? He's the chair of the Senate's Foreign Relations Committee. He similarly recommended at the end of May that the conflict be moved to the World Court. And right, Nasser, of course, he was willing to accede to world court arbitration about these issues. Uh, but as to what Israel was thinking, right, this official quant conjectures with considerable understatement that Israel would have found intervention of the World Court impossible to accept. In the opinion of the State Department's legal advisors, international law almost certainly did not confer on Israel the right to initiate the use of armed force against the United Arab Republic, in the absence of an armed attack by the UAR on Israel. The blockade, he observed in a memorandum Berusk, did not in itself constitute an armed attack, and self-defense did not cover general hostilities against the UAR. Okay, so the legal question, yeah, at the least it's very complicated, and at most, Israel would not have had a right to force open these straits from the Egyptian naval blockade. Now, how crucial was the port, the trade through it? Well, in fact, according to the UN Secretariat, not a single Israeli flagged vessel had used the port of Eilat in the previous 2.5 years. Indeed, a mere 5% of Israel's trade passed through Eilat. The only significant commodity formerly affected by the blockade was oil from Iran, which could have been rerouted at a great cost through Haifa. And it's even clear that, or rather, it wasn't clear whether Nasser was actually rigorously enforcing this blockade, as this official Riquier, I forgot who he was, right? As he asserts, and as the availability of evidence seems to support him, the Egyptian Navy had searched a couple of ships after the establishment of the blockade and thereafter relaxed its implementation. Okay, so, but Israel, begins hostilities. Important to note, though, is that not a single government in the world agreed with Abu Eban's view that Nasser was responsible for the war. They either said, on the one hand, that, well, Israel's the aggressor, or that both sides bear part of the blame, or it's sort of pointless to try and figure out who had the blame, right? So clearly, it is not Israeli self-defense through preemptive strike in the Egyptian case.